We are joined in studio today. Nice to meet you in person.
Yes.
We do this over the phone all the time.
Likewise,
So, yeah.
likewise.
Happy New Year.
To you too.
Rudy Husny is a former advisor in the Stephen Harper government, political analyst, and of course our feature is brought to you by Guaranteed Industries, serving Montrealers since 1957 and reminding you there's a lot of winter still left to go, so consider a Kenner heat pump or furnace from Guaranteed Industries, 514-342-3400, online, guaranteedindustries.com. Lots of places we can go today. We haven't talked about this, certainly not today, so let's kind of jump in. Mark Carney is on his way to China. This is a very important trip. It's the first time a Canadian Prime Minister, I remember mentioning this during the week, has been there like 8 or 9 years.
Exactly.
What does he need to come back with? And we talked about this with a couple of people yesterday. The big story, I guess, what happens with electric vehicles, canola, pork? What are you expecting to happen here?
It's so difficult because exactly as you mentioned, when the Prime Minister of Canada, and it was true for Stephen Harper, it was true for Justin Trudeau, it is even more true now for Mark Carney. Canadians have a lot of expectations that everything's going to be resolved. But as you know, we have a very difficult relationship when it comes to China. Remember foreign interference, for example, that happened in Canada. Also, Canada, it's part of normally our foreign diplomacy to talk about, for example, human rights and rights of, for example, the Muslim population in China. So all of this is very difficult, especially that Mark Carney is trying to rebuild relationship to make sure that Canada still have access to one of the most important market, as you know, when it comes to canola. And it's very interesting because Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, is traveling to China also. There will be a lot of pressure to have access for more canola to China. But at the same time, China is asking for Canada to drop the tariff, the 100% tariff when it comes to electric vehicle, a tariff that wasn't put because of Donald Trump. It was put under Joe Biden to make sure that we had a North American platform, manufacturing platform when it comes to auto sector. So now the question is there going to be a trade-off, or are we just starting to kind of establish or reestablish relationship with China to have a dialogue, and that perhaps there'll be some compromise. But it's very difficult because, again, it's all a question about personality. And the reality is that, and this is from my own personal experience in China, the Chinese government is very patient. They know our political cycle. They can wait, and they've done it. They can wait 4 years, 8 years to say, look, Canada, you're going to have it tough until you change, for example, your policy. And when it comes to agricultural product, for example, they are in need. So is Mark Carney going to do those trade-offs? I don't know, especially now that Mr. Trump has been very clear when it comes to his objective, when it comes to autos. They want it to be built in the U.S. and not in Canada.
So here's my take. I was talking to David Hertel yesterday, who I know you know, and brought something up that I hadn't even considered. So if we're going to go ahead and allow the Chinese to sell cars into the Canadian market, which obviously competes against the Canadian market, but also against the U.S. market, that's not something that's going to make Donald Trump very happy. And David said, why does it have to be 100%? Why does that be all or none? Maybe it's 50% or 40%. Would that make sense, do you think?
Yes, that's maybe possibly the trade-off. Instead of 100%, maybe lower it. And at the same time, China can reciprocate with tariffs that are going to be lower, for example, on canola. But the only problem is that, yes, Prime Minister Carney has premiers of Saskatchewan with him, but there's another premier who already said that he doesn't want any move when it comes to EV, and is Doug Ford. So as you know, it's very difficult as a Canadian Prime Minister to balance those interests when it comes to Ontario on one side, who's already been hit by the U.S. tariff, and saying, again, we're going to possibly have more access to cars from China that will have a direct competition to the U.S. So it's a difficult trade-off. I do believe that it's give and take, but how much are we going to give, and how much is China willing to?
You can't come back with nothing, though.
Exactly. Yes,
right?
I think it's a real possibility, because don't forget that the objective is to have a relationship. Just the fact that China invited Prime Minister Carney is already a step forward, because as you know, since Justin Trudeau, they didn't want to have any relationship when it comes to Canada.
All right, let me kind of shift gears here. We're still talking about trade.
Yes.
We found out today Donald Trump went ahead and he was quoted, I think it was during the Ford plant in the U.S., and said, as far as CUSMA is concerned, which is going to be renegotiated or set to be renegotiated, and he, of course, when he was president the last time, is the one who signed off on CUSMA. Now, two terms later, he's saying, well, he doesn't really care. It doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. And he did the old, I want our cars to be built here, not in Canada. if we don't have this deal, Canada, U.S., Mexico deal, what happens then? Is it just doors wide open, trade with who you want to trade with, or how would it work?
But it's more a question that the reality is that the U.S. needs some, for example, energy product, even softwood lumber and other things. So the reality is Mr. Trump is always saying, we don't need Canada, we don't need Canada. But when you look at the numbers, even for autos, don't forget that the Auto Pact was established in 1950. It's actually the manufacturing between Canada and the U.S. is even older than the first free trade agreement. It was actually the first free trade agreement. So again, it's going to be very difficult because we've seen some plant close in Ontario, for example. But at the same time, when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to critical things, even for the U.S. Department of Defense, they need Canada. So if he doesn't want a trade deal, what does it mean? That Canada is going to have more tariff, or that perhaps we're going to sell some very important product, like, for example, critical minerals, to other countries? But that's not in the U.S. interest.
Right.
And again, it's something that I think it starts with Donald Trump. He doesn't want it until there's pressure from, for example, certain companies or even his own defense sector saying, no, we need Canada for this material, for this critical mineral, for example.
So it's is he the one negotiating this thing? I mean, he has trade representatives. How involved does he get?
Normally, it's a very difficult process because normally you have to sit with Canada, with Mexico on every single chapter, and it's not a very light free trade agreement. It needs to go after every single tariff line of every single product. So it's a lot of work. Don't forget, it took nearly 6 months, I think, the last time, just to negotiate that new CUSMA. You can expect that it can take the same time frame. And again, it's a question of how much the U.S. are going to be willing. What is the mandate that the chief negotiator from the U.S. is going to have? Again, it's something that we cannot answer at this moment, because you know what? Maybe next week he's going to change his mind.
Talk about something else. All right, let me talk about what's going on here provincially. So Charles Milliard, now, of course, racking up a few endorsements from a variety of Liberal members. Everyone is out of this race, at least who we thought was out of this race, except for Mario Roy, who ran last time in the provincial Liberal leadership race, barely got 1% support, yet he's decided maybe I'll run again, although he still apparently owes the party about $18,000. He has to pay it back first. We were talking about this earlier, and I said, there have to be, because Charles Milliard is, I think a pretty fair candidate, right? People so far responding to him. He has support in the regions. I hate to put it this way. It's like Mario Roy doesn't get it. So what happens? I mean, are they going to just gently nudge him out, or because you don't want to appear to push the guy, right? If he wants to run, he should be able to run if he meets all the criteria. What happens?
But the real question is he going to be able to meet those criteria? Because he already has a debt of $18,000, as you mentioned, that needs to be paid off before the February 13 deadline. So it's a very tight deadline. Plus, he needs to, again, raise at least $15,000. So if you look at the numbers, this is something that is going to be very difficult, especially that you cannot donate more than $500 per person. So I think that the reality is that he's not going to be able to do it, and that the Liberal Party will just say you're not meeting the criteria, and that he's not going to be on the ballot, and Charles Milliard is going to win. But I do believe that if we had somebody from the business sector who had experience, who could be a potential prime minister, I think it would have been good to have a good race, to have debates, to have the opportunity. Because don't forget, a leadership race, it's like free advertisement. It's the opportunity for them, for the Liberal Party, to again get some support. But right now, I don't see a debate where you have Mario Roy from one side and Charles Milliard getting the exposure that the Liberal Party needs to rebuild.
Who is that person then? Who is that second person who could, as you mentioned, from the business community, step in and become a viable candidate?
There was a question that Yves Siciliano Desjardins, who's the former president of Siemens Quebec and Canada, and also Via Rail, was potentially a candidate. He said no on Sunday. Yesterday, Guy Cormier, the former president of Desjardins, who's also somebody with a good reputation, said also that he's not running. So the reality is that if there's not somebody, a high-level CEO or somebody with a lot of business experience, because don't forget, at the end of the day, the Liberal Party needs to build his brand when it comes to the economy. economy. So if it's not somebody with a background in business or the economy, he's not going to be a good candidate for the Liberal Party. And the truth is, Mario Roy comes from Beauce. He's a very nice gentleman, but as you said, he has less than 1%, comes from the agricultural sector. It's important agricultural sector, but I don't think he has the leadership to say, I can be Premier of Quebec.
So not Denis Coderre.
Denis Coderre has also, I think, other problems right now.
Okay. If you had your best guess, Rudy, Charles Milliard becomes the guy. How soon, how long till they say, okay,
Yeah, I think the deadline is February 13th. So for Valentine's Day, Charles Milliard, if it's at the latest, will be crowned leader of the Liberal Party of Quebec. But he still has a lot of work to do because don't forget, he needs to get outside of Montreal, win some votes in the region, and especially make a case for federalism in Quebec because his main opponent is Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon.
We leave it at that. Rudy, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Appreciate you coming in too.
Introducing Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio. Hosted by Bryan Adams himself.
Join me for an insider look on a wild ride through 40 years of global rock and roll.
Bryan Adams Radio. Now available on the free iHeartRadio app. Or ask your smart speaker to play Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio.
Who's ready to rock?
Everywhere I go, kids wanna rock.